Yep, I can.
Great, thank you. Well, the first thing we want to do is ask if people have any questions, concerns, confusion from the first session after you've had a chance to process it. And going along with that, were you able to, for those of you who tried to, were you able to find some relevant documents and put them either in the folder we've created or some other folder? So kind of, we want to feel complete about session 1, which was part 1 and part 2 of the How to Solar. And any comments on the homework of trying to assemble the relevant documents. And I won't call on people, I'll just ask you to volunteer. Usually once one person does, it starts an interesting conversation. So,
well, I'll take the lead on this. I had the hardest time probably, I think I expressed my concern about being able to get into, I was kind of like Google Docs challenged, at the time, and but I did manage to post 2 documents. One is the Red Hook Climate Action Plan from 2011. It's 120 pages. It's I think if you look at it, you'll see that it's pretty comprehensive and well laid out. We had some assistance with that back, I guess 10 years ago, right? Or 9 years ago anyway. The other thing is that I put in there the section on the solar zoning, because I know that there's a lot of concern about what kind of zoning, so I think it might be a good template for those of you that are still missing information about how to approach the zoning issues. Again, it's also comprehensive, pretty comprehensive. It covers what we call small, medium, and large solar, which, I know that there's some technical designation above 250, and I'm sure Audrey could weigh in on what those clip levels are for those different designations. So feel free, if you have any questions about it, you can always reach me and make your add some comments. So hopefully those 2 documents will be of some value to you.
anybody else? Go ahead, Katie.
Having just joined, I did spend this afternoon reviewing the video from the last meeting. It was really informative. And I probably need to give you the contact information so I can be part of the Google Docs exchange. I can give you I can either give you my awesome email, my personal email, or my Gmail account, whatever works.
I think the Gmail account is better because with the Gmail account, you'll have access to a shared resource library that we've accumulated. So for example, if you want to see what documents other people, plus they're really good documents, including the foundational document that preceded Scenic Hudson developing the tool. I promised this wouldn't happen tonight, but anyway, yes. And you could put that in the chat?
Or do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm just manajo@clearwater.org if ever anybody has a question, and then I can share it with Melissa and Audrey and Alex as needed. Anybody else have positive, negative, confusion, so that we can feel relatively complete about the first session? Alan, you were leaning forward. Did that mean anything, or I'm not calling on you, but just in case.
No, I was just gonna add, I've also added the town of Marbletown also has regulations covering solar farms and solar generation, and I've uploaded that as well.
So is it actually a solar zoning ordinance?
As I understand it, a lot of this stuff is new to me, and I need to go through and read and understand this myself, frankly.
And as you do, please reach out to me. We can, schedule a time to look at it together, or, if you feel you need that help. And of course, you've got Tom Conrad, who's an expert, could do this all in his sleep.
Yeah, I know that.
But anyway, anybody else have comments or questions?
The town of Gardeners, we uploaded our documents. Don't have everything, but we all uploaded what we could.
And, you can just, once you know how to get into the folder, you can go and not only open the documents that are shared, but you can go into any of the towns in Rosendale. I was able to get most of them, but I now have a question about the solar zoning ordinance. So Chris, between us and Penny, let's try and track that down if they've done anything with that. All right, we have so much really rich information to go over tonight, but I just want to be sure that we felt complete and nobody felt like they're lost, or, we're able to move forward. So with that, I think Melissa, you had something, an exercise you wanted to do real quick.
Yeah, I thought we would just do a little trivia, just 3 questions. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I got this right. Hopefully I'm not sharing the one with the answers. Yes, I am. Okay. Nice. I have a copy without the answers and a copy with the answers, and this is the correct one. So I just took a snippet actually of part 1. And so this first question is, this is a 2 megawatt project in Socrates. Solar projects up to 5 megawatts are often blank. So this is a fill in the blank. Is it community solar projects or non-residential commercial industrial projects? What is this picture an example of, A or B? If you want to throw out and guess, go ahead.
I think it was B.
It is not B, it is A.
Okay.
But there was a lot of pictures on that slide and a lot of different size solar options. So definitely, this is a big one for sure. I think that one was even bigger, but I don't know. Alex or Audrey may know more. This is a fill in the blank question. So this is about energy justice. An energy justice approach involves eliminating the fossil fuel-based system and transitioning to clean, renewable energy while ensuring that disadvantaged communities have blank access to clean energy and its environmental and financial benefits. So I'm going to remember that key term for that, for environmental justice.
Free.
Someone said free? No, but keep guessing, guys. Man, I want
Equal justice.
equal. Yes, it's equal.
Unregulated.
Oh, no.
Equal is what we were looking for. So in energy justice is equal justice. Who said, what does that mean? Who is not on part 1? You can go to the video and we do go into energy justice, which actually has to do with environmental justice. And actually Scenic Hudson put that in the tool, a good definition of it. So
I just was questioning the word equal. It seems a little bit vague.
Okay, gotcha.
Maybe it should mean free. Ha ha ha.
All right, so our third question is what's an example of local plans and or codes that will help with the solar mapping project? So this is something from that bullet pointed list. If you did your homework and you put it in the folder, you'll be able to name one of those key things. We have a list, believe there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things we asked you to get for today.
Agriculture and farmland protection plan.
We'll
Great.
take it.
Natural
Anybody else?
resources inventory.
Yes, we'll take it.
Comprehensive plan.
Yes,
Open space plan.
yes. You guys are doing great. I think there's one more.
NRI.
Same thing as natural resource, but still good.
Oh,
It's okay. The last one is zoning. So
Solar
a
zone.
zoning map or zoning ordinance from the city that you were in.
Well,
That's just 3
what was
questions,
the
nothing.
first one? What was, I wasn't clear if everyone understood the answer to the first one. Yeah.
So this is a picture of a 2 megawatt project in Socrates. So it says solar projects up to 5 megawatts are often blank. So either community solar projects or non-residential. So that had to do with that size graph that we went through with all those call outs with the pictures of the solar arrays that are possible. So this one is a community solar picture.
And
Great.
I'll just jump in and clarify that community solar is really an ownership structure. And hypothetically, it could be of any size, but here in the Hudson Valley, it tends to be that the 1 to 5 megawatt projects are often community solar, but it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah,
And
I put the
not
often in there.
necessarily- Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
definitely just a gauge, not a fact for sure. But yeah, that's just a review of, part 1 and 2. If you didn't make that meeting, that video is up on YouTube now. I think Mana sent up the link as well. And so we go through some of these things we just actually went through now. But I will stop sharing and let, I believe, well, Audrey, you already introduced yourself. So I don't know if we just want to skip to, oh, you have a question, Daniel?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Regarding, is there a difference between solar zoning and a solar code? Because in our town, we've been talking about a solar code as how much do the setbacks have to be? Does it need to be fenced? How, is that the same or a portion of solar zoning, or is it a different?
They're different.
All by itself?
It's different. Zoning and code are 2 different things.
Okay.
Well,
Zoning is where you put it. Code is how it gets set up and built.
That's right.
Okay.
well,
Zoning is part of your code.
yes, yeah, thanks, James, and welcome. Yeah, so a municipal's code or local laws or ordinances is sort of a generic term for all of the legislation that the municipality has adopted. And zoning is a particular type of ordinance. I think what Andrew is talking about, there is also a building code, which is part of the town code or set of ordinances. And that usually governs, when you're talking about applying a building code to solar, that'll probably cover like the electric requirements and fire requirements versus the zoning, which usually will, first of all, dictate where the particular use can go in the town, and then set forth a series of criteria such as the setbacks that you mentioned, or even special use criteria for the various permitted uses. So if you had an opportunity to take a look at the How to Solar Now toolkit, we do have in there a handbook with recommendations for solar zoning. And as Denis pointed out, I think he's already uploaded in the town of Red Hook folder their solar zoning law, which is a part of their code that you might want to take a look at as an example. And I think that I know Alan mentioned, I just looked really quickly, there's a resource online called E-Codes. And it looks like Marbletown has a solar zoning law in place. That's part of their town code. Rosendale has one as well. So I know it's kind of confusing and we'll blame it on the lawyers. But even though they call it the town code, there's building codes are one thing, solar is a part of the town code. So if you are in your town, I think you're from Gardner, correct? I think that you had a code in place already, a solar zoning law. And if you're considering some changes to it, I would offer to take a look at what we have in the How to Solar Now toolkit in that regard. And also NYSERDA has a solar handbook for local governments that also has a model solar law in it as well.
And there should be a model blame the lawyers code too.
Jim, would you introduce yourself, and if anybody else joined, since we did introductions, this is a good time just to say where you're from, who you are.
Thank you, Manna. I'm from the town of Cortland, and I'm sorry I'm late. I was with one of our senators. We're in election season, so he needed to go out and do some walking, but my apologies for being late. But we have a solar code too. Anybody needs it, I think we uploaded it. If not, we'll be happy to send it to you.
Great. Anybody else who hasn't had a chance to say hello yet?
I can say hi. Hi, Manna.
Okay, now that you're live. Great.
My name's Chris. Obviously, I live next door to Manna, which is a good fortune. And I've done a lot of solar installations, mostly in Ulster County, some in Orange County. The two largest ones that I've done was the Rhinebeck Highway Garage. That consists of 200 modules, which is 46 kilowatts. I also did the Rhinebeck Town Hall, the brick building. I also did that one too. So most of my background has been actually connecting, designing the system, connecting it up to the grid, having conversations with Central Hudson to make sure that you can actually backfeed the amount of energy that you're actually generating, which is always a good thing. And just physically making sure it all goes together correctly. It doesn't fly away in the wind. So that's my expertise.
Great. I think it's really excellent, the diversity that we've pulled together here. And I think at this point, we should be ready to jump into section 3. And Audrey, are you going to start and then Alex, or?
Sure, I can kick things off, but I'll hand it over to Alex pretty quickly since it's 7:30 already. So our goal tonight is to get started on part 3 of the tool after having gone through parts 1 and 2, which of course had the education about solar systems themselves, and then our 4-step planning approach to thinking about how to fit solar energy into communities, which is to see what we have built already, find opportunity areas, and then consider what the least impact locations are, and then think about how we interconnect it and where the feasible sites are in terms of slope and aspect. So you will find as Alex goes through it that part 3 follows those 4 planning steps. I just wanted to remind folks that when you go through part 3, we do provide a document. You can either have it as a PDF and print it out and write on it in the good old fashioned pen and paper way, or you can download it as a Word document. And that worksheet follows through part 3 of the tool. And as you use it and look at the data layers and get information about the particular area that you're looking at, you can record that. And then that you will have that all in place as you move forward with the next planning steps and really think about where we're going to locate these. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Alex. He is our conservation scientist and the main architect, speaking of architects, Katie, of the solar mapping tool. And I know that it's sort of an abstract concept when we just say, oh, it's a solar mapping tool and it uses GIS data layers. And it's hard to think about what exactly that looks like. So now we will get finally a chance of actually seeing it in all its glory and what it looks like online with actual maps on one side and guidance on the other. And really what we're interested in is I think less about sort of taking you through the tool and making any specific decisions, but giving you the background of our thinking and the information, the data layers that we provided in the tool and their relevance to solar energy siting. So you can sort of understand what our thinking was behind this and then how it will be useful to you. So I will kick it off to Alex.
Okay, thank you, Audrey, and good evening, everybody. My name is Alex Wolf. As Audrey said, my title is conservation scientist. Despite the mention of architecture, I am not an architect. My background is actually in wildlife biology. And now these days I do a lot with both natural resources here in the Hudson Valley and also with climate change, including sea level rise issues and of course solar siting. So I do have a fair bit of GIS in my background. That's geographic information systems, basically digital mapping like the solar mapping tool. And so while I did sort of put the pieces together, I certainly would not want to diminish Audrey's role in sort of guiding a lot of the information that goes into the tool. So we're going to get started here. I will share my screen. And part 3 is the longest part of the solar mapping tool. And so we're going to see how far we get tonight. I don't expect that we'll finish it, but please, feel free to ask questions as we go along here. And I can't always see everybody, so just feel free to unmute yourself and start yelling at me if I say something confusing or you want me to slow down or anything like that. So hopefully everybody can see my screen okay. We're on part 3. I shared the right window. Yes, good. So as Audrey said, part 3 is going to go through these data layers, these layers of information in this map one by one and sort of explain what the layer is and how it relates to solar. And as Audrey said, we really made an effort to only include layers that we could directly relate to solar in their relevance. There are tons and tons of data layers out there that are publicly available. All the layers in this tool are publicly available. Not all of them are equally relevant to solar. And in some cases, there are more than one layer to represent a given resource. So for instance, we'll get to agricultural soils. There are lots of different data layers to represent different characteristics of agricultural soils. And because we are putting so much information into the tool already, we tried to talk to farmers, talk to New York State Ag and Markets, talk to agricultural experts, and pick the single best agricultural soils layer to put in the tool. And that's the case with a lot of these different resource categories. But there are others out there, and some of you may want to bring other ones to the table. So as Audrey said, there is guidance and language here on the left side of the screen. And as I move through the screen, the right side is going to change and we'll get either maps or additional information. As with parts 1 and 2, there are these light blue quick help buttons. So for instance, if you needed a refresher on what the 4 steps of smart solar planning are, you could click this button here and then you click back to get out of that. And these 4 steps do sort of form the outline for part 3. Like Audrey said, we have this worksheet here in PDF or in Word. And it's basically just an outline for part 3. It's got some additional or some sort of rephrased information and some sort of questions to prompt you to take some notes. But you're free to use this however you want as you go through the tool on your own in the future. We also have tips and frequently asked questions document if you're getting stuck with some of the functionalities of the tool when you're on your own. But of course, I'm also happy to answer any questions. So actually, it's right here. So step 1 of the 4 steps of smart solar planning is assessing existing development patterns. And we use a land cover map to look at that. And so I thought this evening we would actually use the town of Wallkill as an example because it has nice, lots of different layers show up nicely in the town of Wallkill. So I'm going to click this magnifying glass here and search Wallkill, New York. And hopefully I get the town and not the hamlet. There we are. I'm going to clear that. So the map has automatically zoomed us in on the town of Wallkill, and I can highlight it there and it'll tell me it's a town as opposed to a city or a village, what the population is, what the area is in acres. And what we're seeing here is this land cover map. If you've never looked at a land cover map, this is a pretty commonly used layer amongst GIS circles. This is a federally produced layer. So this covers the entire US, and the symbology or the different colors on the map and what they mean are the same everywhere. The legend is over here. And if you wanted to review what I'm about to tell you, we have an info dive here that teaches you basically how to read these land cover layers. So I've clicked on this info dive button here, and then I scroll down on the right side, and we use the example of Kingston here, but I'm going to walk you through it for Wallkill instead. So basically with these land cover maps, the reds are developed areas, and the darker the red, the more developed the area is. And you can see that here, there's low intensity, medium, and high intensity. And so as we get around the city of Middletown, you can see we have a lot more development here. And these red lines, of course, are roads usually that you'll see snaking through communities. And so if you sort of look at the town as a whole, you can see, you know, the city of Middletown and then this area here are sort of the most developed areas in town. And then you have this major road corridor going through with little bits of development along the way. Now, greens tend to be forests. We have different types of forested represented. So you can see there's a lot of forested areas through here. And then yellow and brown are agricultural or cultivated areas, pasture and hay. The brown is cultivated crops. Now, these things do change periodically. So of course, this isn't written in stone. But the point here is not to delve into a specific farm field that may change from one to the other year to year, but look at your community as a whole and sort of get a general sense of development patterns. And again, coming at this from a land use planning perspective, where are the developed areas now? Where are the open space areas now? Where are the forest and the wetland resources right now? The blues, of course, being wetlands and water. So this light blue here is a wetland. This is a lake or a pond right here. And so we could zoom in at this land cover layer is really not meant to be very fine scale and zoom into the specific site, but to give you an overall impression of your town. And again, to sort of figure out where those developed areas are. And again, we have some quick help things here. So if you can click on one of these, it'll just point out your buttons and your legend. And we also have some reminders of you know, the developed versus farms, fields, and forested areas. And as we scroll down here, we have sort of some prompting questions. You know, do these development patterns that you're seeing for your town right now, do they align with what your zoning is? Do they align with what you want your community to look like? And where do you see the opportunities sort of at a high level, right? This is looking from 30,000 feet. Where are the good and the bad places to put different types of solar? So any questions on that? Okay, great. So we're going to move on to step 2 of the 4 steps of smart solar planning here, which is identifying these opportunity areas. We have 3 different data layers to cover this. And the first talked about on the left side here is rooftops and their adjacent parking lots. So the rooftops are highlighted in orange. And if we zoom in a little bit, we'll see them picked out here. And I can click on a rooftop and get an approximate size of that rooftop. So this is a 16-acre building, which is a lot of acreage. And of course, as I'm showing here on the left, when you zoom into these large buildings, gee whiz, there tend to be large parking lots surrounding them. So what this is really highlighting is the large impervious surface areas. And often these large, really large buildings, and we've highlighted buildings that are about half an acre or larger, about 20,000 square feet or larger. So these are really big buildings. We're not talking about putting solar on the roof of your home. We're talking about, you know, either large industrial, commercial, or institutional buildings. And this layer tries to pull those out and sort of get you thinking about what opportunities there might be. And so for instance, for places like warehouses, shopping centers, big box stores, institutions, where you have a lot of impervious surface, you may have the opportunity to put solar, either canopy solar in parking lots or rooftop solar on without impacting the current land use at all, right? And so that's sort of the ideal here, right? If we can put solar in our community without impacting existing land use, that's the golden opportunity. Of course, you have to bring local knowledge to the table. I'm not that familiar with Wallkill, so I don't know what all these are. This is probably a throughway interchange here. I would imagine these are some large retail areas or maybe warehouse distribution centers. And so you have to know, who owns them? Is the owner amenable? Will the roof support the weight of solar panels? That sorts of things. But hopefully this will get folks thinking about where we can put solar without impacting existing land use. So the next layer, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. And I should mention throughout the solar mapping tool, different layers will turn on and off at an appropriate scale. And so for instance, the land cover maps that we were looking at last time, if you zoom in too close, it's going to disappear because it's really not meant to be zoomed in on. It doesn't have fine enough accuracy to really get down to the building level. The buildings, of course, you do want to zoom in pretty far. And so you don't see them when you zoom out, but as you zoom in close enough, you will start to see them. And that's the case for all the layers in the tool. Okay, so the next layer is these diamonds here. This is actually a data set that the US EPA compiled, and they drew from their own data and also from state data. So in our case, from the New York State DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation. And these are sites that are being remediated for some reason. And you'll see whether they've come from the state or from the EPA, but Superfund sites, brownfields, landfills, contaminated sites, things like that are going to show up as these diamonds here. And EPA has very conveniently screened all of these for potential for all renewable energies. Now we've only included the ones for solar in here because that's obviously the most relevant thing that we're talking about, but they've screened for solar, wind, geothermal, and maybe one or two others. So a really extensive data set. But again, they're pulling mostly from DEC and from their own files. And so I can click on any of these diamonds and get this pop-up here. And then there are two more info links. One is the remediation status and the other is the solar potential profile. So I'm going to click on this first one here, and this brings us right to the DEC page for this particular site. So this looks like maybe it was a dry cleaner site. And if I scroll down, it'll tell me the site description, the contaminants of concern, the assessment, and the health assessment for the site. And it includes pretty detailed information about, for instance, drinking water and whether it's safe for people to be in the area, et cetera. And so this information might help you think about, well, gee, is this an appropriate place for a school or for residential housing? Or, is this really a place that maybe would be good for solar because it's not very suitable for other things? The other link that I will click here is the solar potential profile. That is from EPA. So that drops me onto an EPA webpage for this repowering data set, as they call it. And what they've done is they've done some sort of coarse filtering to figure out the size of the site, and then whether they think it's suitable for all of these types of solar. So in this case, it's a 55-acre site, and they think it would be suitable for small utility scale or large scale solar projects. And they even have a megawatt estimate here. Now, this was based solely, I think, on acreage of the site and proximity to things like roads and transmission lines. So this is not a direct answer, but it's, again, it's sort of leading you down a road to things that you may want to investigate. So zooming out to Middletown a little bit again, we can see there are remediation sites all over town. And as you're going through the tool, you may be familiar with some of these that are You may know exactly what some of them are. Some of them may be worth a second look. Some of them have already been repurposed into new things. So for instance, here's a remediation site that's in a residential community. And so maybe, you know, that's not going to be big enough for the solar that you're looking to build. Others are going to be, you know, these sort of large post-industrial sites or landfills are also listed in this data set. And for the landfills, it includes whether the landfill is still active or not. If you, so I've just clicked on these, and as I scroll down through this pop-up window, there is lots of information here, including its landfill. If it is a landfill, it'll say yes, whether it's open or closed, the year it was closed, if it was closed, et cetera. And so I know a lot of communities in the Hudson Valley and elsewhere have had a lot of success placing solar on landfills. There may be other opportunities. You know, here's a large rooftop that's also a remediation site. So, you know, you have to know, again, this is where local knowledge is really important. What is that building today? Who owns it? Is it still in use? But if it's sort of a defunct post-industrial building that's, you know, really badly contaminated, maybe the best reuse for that land would be solar.
Alex, I have a question. When
Please.
they do the solar potential, are they also looking at whether or not the utility can take that, transmit that amount of electricity back into the system?
That is a good question. I think the answer is no. Let's see. So here we'll, so solar is the first one, but you'll see they've also screened sites for geothermal, biomass, et cetera.
No, it doesn't look like it's there.
I don't think so. No. And hopefully last time you talked a little bit about distributed versus utility scale solar. So distributed solar are the smaller projects that are going sort of locally into the local power grid, and the utility scale ones are the really large scale ones that need substations and need high power transmission lines. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But I think if anything, they might have done the transmission lines, but not the smaller scale local distribution lines. Amanda, do you have a question? You're on mute.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that that's one of the basic principles is, you know, in designing our solar maps and recommendations is what are good areas, which you've touched on a lot of examples. What are areas to be protected or avoided for, you know, various different reasons. And then what are areas that could be good if there was good interconnection? And one of the layers is about the grid interconnection. So that was a really excellent question. And it's not already answered in the layers that I know of, but that is exactly the exercise or a part of the exercise that we're doing. So I just wanted to help people remember that. Thank you.
That's a great reminder. Thank you. So as we move down to the next layer, I'm going to just sort of point out features as they occur to me. I'm going to move down to mines here next. And I'm just seeing the side panel here, which I should tell you all about. This is sort of your table of contents guide here. So this light dot is where we are now. And if you hover over these, you can skip around through the tools. So if I wanted to say, go back to step 1, I could click right here and I could go back to step 2, and it's going to keep where I am in the map, but it's going to change the layers that are up according to where I am in part 3 here. So the last opportunity layer here that we're going to talk about is mines. These are the data layer is DEC permits for mines. And again, if I click on these, now we're talking about the circular yellow dots here. If I click on it, I get a pop-up with the name, whether it is still active or whether it's been reclaimed, the approximate size, the type of mine, and often the reclamation type, which can be quite useful. Sometimes these are now ponds or lakes, sometimes they're meadows or grass like this one. And so again, zooming out to the town as a whole, you can see there are a lot of mines or former mines in town. And some of these are still active and some have been remediated already. So I'm going to zoom into this suite of 3 here. This one supposedly has been reclaimed, and we have aerial photography underneath as our base map here. So you probably all, have sort of seen this type of thing now, right? Here's our probably the thruway or another major road. Here's a local road. We can see an active mining operation right here. And then we see this area here. And although it says, if I click on this, that this 10-acre area has been reclaimed already, probably they had a contractor in who tried to seed some grass or something, and it looks kind of patchy and sad. And so this is already an area where the natural resources have been heavily impacted. Perhaps these areas are not coming back very well. Maybe they tried to make them into a meadow, but they're pretty scraggly. So these again can be really good opportunities where the past land use has lent itself to solar. Solar, you want flat cleared land, right? And this looks like it's certainly been cleared and has probably been flattened as part of the mine reclamation process. So these former mines can be really good opportunities for solar. And there are, again, a few, at least a couple projects in the Hudson Valley that I'm aware of where they have used a reclaimed mine to site solar. And again, we consider this an opportunity, again, because this land use here, if this is supposed to represent habitat, it's probably not doing a very good job of it. The site's already been impacted. There are roads to it. It may already have things like electrical lines going to it. And so these again can be really good opportunities. So zooming out, and just sort of as a reminder, I said these can be good opportunities. We have lots of them in the town of Wallkill, and this again is where you have to bring some local knowledge to the table. And then we do have a note here about using our aerial imagery, the satellite map in the background here to, you can also just sort of notice disturbed areas and sort of gauge them for yourself. Here's an airport that I'm noticing. Is there room in the margins of the cleared area for this airstrip? Could you fit solar in there? Maybe. So I encourage everybody to sort of explore their town using the solar mapping tool, and you'll find all sorts of interesting things, including potentially solar opportunities you may not have thought of or that we haven't found data layers to represent. Any questions on any of those layers before I keep cruising along here? Okay. So step 3 of smart solar planning is identifying the locations where you want to avoid negative impacts to valued resources. So what is a valued resource? It's whatever your community values. I think there are a few that probably a lot of folks would put on that list pretty quickly, and we've listed them here. But of course, the Hudson Valley is a very diverse place, and some places are more developed, some places are more rural, some places are more agricultural, or place more importance on, say, outdoor recreation and wild spaces, or a combination thereof. So it's really, we're going to, again, bring some data layers to the table here, but it is ultimately, up to you and your communities to weigh what is most important for your community and its sort of well-being. So we're going to start with agricultural layers and promoting co-location where appropriate. And this is a very nuanced topic. I think probably a lot of folks on the call would agree that agriculture is an important part of the character of the Hudson Valley. Scenic Hudson certainly thinks that's the case. We have our food shed plan, which sort of lays out a conservation strategy to make sure that the Hudson Valley can keep growing food to feed us, to feed New York City, to keep local agricultural economies going. So that's certainly, you know, a priority in a lot of places in the valley. And so we have an info dive because this is not, you know, it's not quite as simple as never put solar on a farm. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of ins and outs. And so I'm actually, so that you don't have to keep listening to me all night, I'm going to invite Audrey to jump in and walk us through the info dive as I scroll, if she's ready and willing.
I am here. Thanks, Alex. You're doing so well. Nobody has any questions. That's how thorough you are. So,
I've
but
bored
of
them to
course,
sleep, I'm sure.
you throw me the difficult area. So I think as Andrew actually sort of prefaced for us at the beginning of the call, there are definitely some areas where, you know, our interests as a state and actually as, you know, as the whole world in trying to achieve this shift in our energy generation and our entire energy economy to green or renewable or clean energy, the various terms, which do have slightly different meanings, does bring with it some conflicts. And one of the biggest ones here in New York that we have been seeing, not necessarily so much in the Hudson Valley, because we haven't seen that many of the utility scale projects, as Alex explained to us what those are, the very, very large projects, which tend to take up a significant amount of acreage. We do have a couple of those that have, one is starting to get built, another were just recently approved. I think we talked about this last time in Greene County, and there's another one proposed in Columbia County. But for the most part, it's going to be those smaller projects, as Alex, you know, described to us, those community solar projects, which are of a smaller scale, and fitting those into our landscapes and our agricultural landscapes might be not as difficult. But nevertheless, we still need to find ways to, first of all, you know, make sure that we are not impacting or compromising not just, you know, individual farms, but agricultural economies in regions, and also, you know, trying to find ways and solutions to see if we can do both things at once, right? It makes sense that a lot of solar projects are being proposed for agricultural areas because the same sort of flat, wide open spaces where it's good to grow food is also the same flat and wide open space where it's good to generate energy from solar. So Alex, if you want to just skim through, I probably memorized most of this, right? But one of the solutions that is becoming more and more viable has been studied around the world and here in the United States. The National Renewable Energy Labs of the Federal Department of Energy is really working on promoting this. And then also I know, like for instance, the Yale Center for Business and Environment, I just got an email in my inbox today. Folks at their Clean Energy Finance Forum, you know, are thinking about this. And at the state level, right, as New York State is pushing policies and adopting legislation to promote renewable energy, we do have folks at the Department of Ag and Markets. We have folks at NYSERDA, the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority, who are really trying to delve into this conflict and find ways to come up with solutions. So Alex will get there in a second, but you know, the information that we provided in this tool is with regard to agricultural soils. But this deep dive is really about one particular potential solution, and that is agrovoltaics or agrophotovoltaics, or co-locating solar and agriculture at the same time. And so ag and solar can, you know, or we can work on trying to create sort of a symbiosis between agriculture and solar energy in a few different ways. One of those, and sort of the most, you know, easy way, so to speak, is to seed the area around solar panels with native plants and pollinator-friendly plants. And so in that way, those plants around the solar panels, if there is agriculture nearby that is dependent on pollinators, right, it will help to promote those populations of pollinators and then support the pollinator dependent agriculture nearby, right? Then you can actually have some agricultural practices and solar happening at the same time. For instance, you can have an apiary. I think Alex has some pictures of beehives here. One thing that is getting a lot of interest there is the American Solar Grazing Association. I don't know if any of you have come across, there's a woman named Lexi Haynes, she's out of Ithaca, and she's basically running like a dating site for sheep farmers and solar developers, right? And the idea here is rather than having to pay to mow the area around solar panels, you have a contract with a sheep farmer who can then sort of drive their sheep around and then let them graze in a particular solar field for a while. Apparently goats eat cables and are not that good of a partner for solar panels. I have seen examples of cows and solar in Vermont, but there you need to you need to do some significant technological changes to the panels in terms of making them high enough so the cows don't sort of like, rub up against them or knock them over, although it is possible. So, again, the interest is in finding ways to do this. And then of course, sort of, the holy grail is to be able to produce food and solar at the same time. And so a lot of studies have gone into this. I've seen examples of mushrooms. Here is a picture of a research facility that's located at UMass Amherst, where they're growing sort of these hand crops underneath the panels. And because this is a research facility, those panels that you can see in the picture here, they can actually be moved. And so the research is showing that there's actual mutual benefits. And so as opposed to having a plot of land that is purely creating solar energy or a plot of land that is purely creating plants, they're actually finding that if you put them together, you can actually get more efficiency out of the land as a whole. And so while you might get less energy and a little bit less crops than individually, when the sum actually winds up, or the whole ends up being greater than the sum of the parts, because they're getting more efficiency. And it's also been demonstrated that there are benefits to the plants from the shading, and there's even benefits to workers who might be harvesting the crops in terms of, a little bit of cooling effect, reducing heat stress on the plants, and also the people who are working under the panels. So, of course, the big issue here is this even financially viable, right? So in addition to challenges of interconnection and supply chain issues that we talked about last time that solar developers are facing, the real question is, can you get a project to pencil out, so to speak, right? Because as opposed to being able to just sort of slap up conventional solar panels on the usual and easily commercially available racking systems. And, if you are going to do something like try and co-locate or have a facility which actually has agrovoltaics on it, then we have to have incentives and certain policies in place to promote that, at least at this point, because it does create a significant cost to the developers to have to design and construct and operate their facilities in a slightly different manner to be able to accommodate that. So that is one thing that quite a few folks around the state are looking at, figuring out how we do that. Right now, the main sort of system of agricultural impact avoidance that is in place when it comes to both the utility scale projects and the smaller scale projects is they look at certain soil classes, and then the large scale projects, which are supported through a solicitation process by NYSERDA, those projects that do a better job of avoiding those soils then get some extra credit or more points in the award system. So it creates an incentive to try and avoid those important agricultural soils. And it's the same way under what's called the New York Sun program, which is sort of the smaller scale solar incentive program that supports distributed energy, as Alex defined for us a little while ago. And in that system, because they are awarding state money to those projects in the form of adders onto the amount of money that they get per kilowatt, it is required that before the money gets handed over to those projects, an agricultural impact analysis is done through a notice and review process with the Department of Agricultural Markets. And the Department of Agricultural Markets looks at a proposed project and says, you know, these will be the impacts, and these are our mitigation requirements, and that's how mitigation of agricultural impacts is happening in that way. You know, but as was mentioned at the outset, there's sort of not a larger plan. There's, you know, agricultural soils as opposed to things like wetlands, which are regulated and protected specifically under law in the state. We don't have such kind of legal protections for agricultural soils. So that's why it falls to you know, people like yourselves at the municipal level, land trusts, you know, to find the ways to, first of all, you know, identify what the valuable agricultural resources are that we have, and then figure out where it might make sense to put solar, and then find ways to promote, you know, and align both policies in the interest of both renewable energy and agricultural soils. And it's not, there are no very evident, easy answers as to how to do this, right? It would be really nice if we had a map and the map said, these are all the soils and we need to stay out of them and all the solar should go over here. But then again, you might have a dairy farmer who's been growing corn, and then it turns out that, you know, it's not economically viable for them to grow the corn anymore. They would buy it elsewhere. And now the back 40 where they've been growing corn is sitting there useless to them. So if a solar developer comes and proposes to lease that land, now you have the potential for an extra income stream to help support that agricultural entity, you know, and also get solar in there. So, you know, it's almost like it would be nice if we had a map and a plan and it was all nice and pat and tied up in a bow, you know, but there aren't such easy answers. So there is some information in that solar zoning guidebook that I mentioned that's in the How to Solar Now with regard to all of the state agricultural protection policies that are out there, and some recommendations about, you know, what you can actually put into your local solar zoning law or code or whatever you want to call it, in terms of, you know, criteria to ensure that proposed solar projects you know, avoid and minimize and mitigate impacts. So yeah, it's not easy. You know, I don't envy the developers who are trying to get the projects done. I don't envy the farmers who are trying to, you know, keep their farms going in the face of probably rising commodity prices and you know, losing agricultural value, and then also the, you know, the municipal representatives such as yourselves who are trying to, you know, straddle those two worlds and find the best ways to promote it. So hopefully we've got some information here in the deep dive and in the How to Solar Now tool. And so with that, I will stop talking. I'll kick it back over to Alex and he can talk to you about what actually we have in the tool for information on agricultural soils.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. So that was a great overview for the issue as a whole. Again, we are in this info dive right here, learn more about co-locating agriculture and solar right now. And Audrey covered a lot of the things that we talk about here. I think one other key point that I'll hit is that solar facilities are temporary. It's a lot easier to pull a solar facility out of the ground than it is, say, a warehouse or a housing development or, you know, an actual building. And so, you know, solar projects should have decommissioning plans. And they may actually be a way to rest soil that's been overworked in the past, or they may be a way to tide, like Audrey said, tide farmers over and give them a little bit of support for part of their land while they're still farming the rest. And so, there are a lot of different options here in terms of co-locating. So at the end of the info dive here, we do have additional resources. As you're gathering, this is not an easy topic, but there is a lot of information out there. So we have, a farmer's guide to going solar from the Department of Energy. We have stuff about leasing. We have information from the New York Department of Ag and Markets about guidelines for construction mitigation. So basically, things like making sure that you're not damaging soils to the extent possible. If you're going to put in solar in agriculturally suitable lands for, say, the relatively short term of 25 years or so. And the National Renewable Energy Lab also has basics of low impact solar. And they have a guidebook for that too. So I encourage you, these are all detailed resources, but they're all here. And here in New York, the Ag and Markets Department and Cornell and the Cornell Cooperative Extension offices are all working. Those cooperative extensions were originally focused on agriculture, so they're spending a lot of time thinking about this, researching it, and coming out with more new information all the time. I think the Dutchess Cornell Cooperative Extension recently held a live in-person and virtual event, sort of talking to farmers about what to think about if you're thinking about going solar. So there are certainly lots of resources out there, and I encourage anybody who wants to dig in further to do so. So getting back to our maps here, we are still zoomed in on the town of Wallkill here. We're pulling up our agricultural farm soils. And this is a great opportunity to point out that sometimes the mapping tool can be a little slow. You'll see these and these are individually mapped soil units. So I can click on one of these and you'll see there are all these squiggly lines. At some point, somebody did soil surveys across the whole country, basically, to try to find out where the best soils are. So they're all kind of filling in here. And, there are 3 classes in this classification that we're using. Like I said earlier, farm soils, there are a lot of different ways to represent them on a map. We picked one that our agricultural experts told us was a pretty reliable one to use in terms of actually thinking about farming, but it is also one that people who are not farmers or ag experts can understand easily. So this is prime farmland, prime if drained, and farmlands of statewide importance. These prime soils have definitions that are set by the US Department of Agriculture, and then states can designate what they think are soils of statewide importance. And so basically the prime soils are the best soils for farming according to this classification system. Prime if drained is a little bit tricky because you don't know if they've been drained or not. And sometimes these are very productive farm fields, and sometimes they're still wetlands because they were never drained, and we probably want to leave them as wetlands. So again, got to bring some local knowledge to the table. But zooming out a little bit, and again, being patient as the map loads all these tiny squiggly lines, we can kind of get a sense in our example town of Wallkill here, where the prime soils seem most concentrated. And, I always have a bit of a hard time looking at this map and coming away with something. And it can be a little bit hard trying to wrap your head around this. And so we wanted to try to put this in context for individual communities. And so we came up with this table of acreages, and there's a link to it right here, and it'll open up in a new tab or a new window. And we can scroll down here and we can go to, I believe Wallkill is in Orange County. So I clicked on Orange County there. Here is the town of Wallkill, unfortunately at the bottom of the page. But what we're getting is the acreages of all of these soil types, the total acreage of all of them combined, and then the acreage of your town as a whole. And so you can kind of put into perspective, Wallkill is a 40,000 acre town. It has less than 2,000 acres of prime soils, but over half of the town is a soil of statewide importance for farming. And so, you know, if you have a situation where either a developer has approached the community and says, I want to build a 100-acre project and it's all going to be in prime farmland, is that a problem? Hopefully these acreages will help you think about that. Or conversely, I want to build a 100-acre project or a 20-acre project and it's in farmland of statewide importance. Is that an issue? Hopefully these numbers can help you figure that out. Or I think New Pulse was working on their town code and they were going to set limits that only, I forget what it was, would say 50% of their ag soils could be developed as solar. And that was the cap, that was their upper limit. Don't quote me on the specifics on that, but you get the idea. So hopefully this can help you to sort of figure out, you know, put these soils in context, figure out how much, say, prime soil or how much farm soil acreage you have, and also realizing where these places are. So we can see here, you know, this is a nice big cluster of farmland soils, including prime soils. And so maybe, you know, if there aren't a lot of those in town, we want to think about how that's treated in relation to solar as well as other types of development. The other layer we have mapped here is agricultural districts. Now, this is a legal and tax designation. This is done through the New York Certified Agricultural District Program, and it affords legal protections and some tax benefits for viable agricultural land. And agricultural land is defined a little bit loosely in terms of time. These parcels could have been a farm. I think within the last 5 years, they had to be actively farmed, or if they're planning to be active, or have the potential to contribute to keeping the region's agricultural industry viable. So pretty broad definitions here. And this can afford the owners of these parcels tax breaks. But to do that, agriculture has to be the main land use on that parcel. And if that changes, there can be tax penalties. There are times when solar developers may be willing to pay this tax penalty for the landowner, but it depends on each individual situation. The other thing to note is that you can, if you're a farmer, you can install solar to support your farming operations. Basically, if you install enough solar to support about as much power as you need, 110%, strictly speaking, then you're still considered an agricultural operation. You don't have to worry about tax penalties, et cetera. And there is a more in-depth document here that you could download and learn a little bit more, get into the weeds a bit more on these agricultural districts. But I found, scrolling back and forth around the map, that in some places, the agricultural districts and the soils really line up quite well. And you'll see that in some towns where there isn't a lot of farm soils, almost all of the ag districts line up with almost all of the farm soils. And so that may give you some clues as to how much of the land is really being farmed actively or not. Questions on any of the agricultural things we talked about so far? Okay, let's see which one chat. So the question we have in the chat here, any best practices in terms of decommissioning plans? I don't know, Audrey, if you have a good answer for that one. I want to jump in.
This is hi, where am I? I'll start my video. I keep turning my video off just to sort of save bandwidth here. So Jim, yeah, that's a really good question. I am personally not convinced that probably at least the solar developers who are leasing land don't have maybe a right of first refusal or a right to be able to extend their lease of land, because really, you know, who can see 30 to 40 years into the future? It might be the case that they could, you know, remove the panels that are there, and we might have technology in place where a panel will be even more have even more ability to generate energy. So where, we might have a 400 watt panel, and there might be 1,000 watt panels. So a 5 megawatt project today can be a 10 megawatt project in 30 years, without expanding the footprint. So the area of decommissioning is a little bit of a fraught one. I know that it's probably practice of municipalities to adopt codes that require having financial security in place, surety in place, so that the decommissioning will happen. I think similar to what a lot of municipalities have done with cell towers. And so, to the extent that you can get the information out of a developer, I think, you could just be asking them that, what do you plan to do after decommissioning? But you will probably be told, as I have found in the past, that they don't really know. And so, I as Alex mentioned, when it comes to agricultural soils, maybe soils that have been overused in the past, putting solar panels on them for a little while will mean that they get to rest and build up, and then farming could take place again in the future. So I don't know that we have any recommendations for best practices, except to ask the question and try and get as much transparency as possible. But just like any other use, it's hard to know what's going to happen. So I know that's probably not a very satisfying answer.
Oh, that's good. Thank you, Audrey. Yeah, no, we've had a couple of solar developers who have been trying to buck the trend of opposition when they were looking to build in areas where there are forests. And they said, how about this? We'll donate the property back after the 30 or 40 years. And then the town can have it forever open space, which is of course appealing, but that's 30 or 40 years down the road. Very few residents are thinking that far down the road. They want to know what's in it for them now. What do they have to deal with? What needs to be mitigated now? So.
Yeah. That almost sounds like a remainder clause, like in a will or something, right? You get to
absolutely
say,
yep.
Or as Andrew mentioned, at the beginning, some sort of a springing conservation easement or something like that, that comes into
the law schools will deal with that.
Yeah.
I think Mana Joe may have had something to add as well, and then I see Carol's hand is up as well.
Yeah, this brings up something that I wanted to mention. A few years ago, we did a program called Exercising Caution when Scaling Up Solar or Scaling Up Renewables. And we brought in an attorney from, I believe, Sullivan County, who was an expert because municipality, or rather, large landowners, farmers and other large landowners were being lured into lease agreements that were bordering on predatory. Not all the time, but it was happening frequently enough that this attorney developed expertise and would read over the leases and make recommendations. And one of them was about being clear about decommissioning at end of life. But mostly it was about the developers overreaching and claiming rights over other parts of the property that really didn't relate to the solar project, and what landowners could do or not do with their property. So if we can fit him in, or even without using up our project time, I can send around the link. It was recorded, and I can put that in our resources if it's not already there. And the person's name, which doesn't come to mind, Stephen something, but I'll find it and send it around. This is the Thursday night cough that doesn't occur any other time except when I'm on this call. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mena Joe. Feel better. You got this. Was it Steve Beglianti?
Yeah, I think Carol's up.
Oh, just a question. So NYSERDA has their model solar laws, which has decommissioning subsections. I'm assuming you guys know about this, and I'm curious what you think about it.
I have not looked at the model solar law on NYSERDA's website in a while. I think they did provide, provision for requiring financial surety and decommissioning. I'm not going to give legal advice. I know there's an attorney named Dan Spitzer. I forget what firm he's from, and he has given several talks on, the question of whether or not you can legally force a developer to put that surety up. I know it's a practice and it's specifically authorized, like for SWIPs, right? For stormwater facilities, that there's some financial surety put in there. But if NYSERDA is including that in the model law, that's something that the community can consider.
Okay, thank you. Good questions and discussion there. I'm going to back up just a minute before we go on, and sort of zoom out in our process here and just sort of remind everybody that there is that handout at the beginning of part 3. And, just to kind of reiterate, like, okay, we're going through layers one by one, and sooner or later, we're going to want to start putting things together, right? And so hopefully that handout, really the reason we created it is so that you can basically take notes. So for instance, for Wallkill here, you might want to note, for instance, where our best prime soils are, or where, if there are ag districts that you want to see, are they actually active? Are they being farmed? You might just sort of take notes on that, that sort of thing. And then as we get to part four, you get to turn on and off all the layers. And so, again, you're just sort of recording things that you want to look into in the future, things you want to learn more about. You might, while you're reading about decommissioning in our ag and co-location info dive, you might make a note to look at NYSERDA's guidebook on decommissioning, et cetera. So hopefully that's a useful tool to have at your side, either printed or in a Word document or something. Okay, so wetlands and floodplains. Obviously, wetlands are incredibly important resources, as are floodplains, and I think probably the folks on this call are familiar with why that is the case. They give us so many ecosystem services, so many benefits from decreasing flooding downstream, water filtration, habitat, storing carbon for climate change, et cetera. So generally, we're going to want to avoid intact wetlands. And we have a few different layers here. We couldn't narrow it down in this case. So we have 2 layers that represent wetlands. These are presented, but you're probably going to need to do on the ground wetland delineations. And when I say you, the solar developer will need to do on the ground delineations when push comes to shove and a site is actually being, project's actually being planned out as part of the seeker process or the state processes for reviewing. There will need to be on the ground surveys, but hopefully these layers will help inform townwide planning, get you the big picture, maybe prompt some questions of developers, et cetera. So the first layer we have up here is the National Wetlands Inventory. This is created by the US Fish and Wildlife Service. And they basically tried to map every single wetland in the United States using satellite and aerial photos. And this layer itself, what you're seeing on the map here, is not a regulatory layer, but it can inform Army Corps of Engineers regulation of wetlands. And one of the reasons we included it is because it's a very informationally rich data layer. And it includes, for one thing, wetland type, which can be quite instructive. There are, forested wetlands, there are marshes, there are creeks and rivers. And so you can click around and learn about the different types of wetlands that are in your area. The next layer that is going to build on top of that National Wetland Inventory, and you'll notice as I go back and forth, there's a lot of overlap, but not complete overlap. So if you look at this big one here, and then we have smaller ones, as I scroll down and we add on these DEC wetlands, these are, the DEC does regulate wetlands. They have jurisdiction over wetlands that are 12.4 acres in size, or certain smaller wetlands of unusual local importance. And so you'll notice the bigger ones tend to be mapped here with the DEC layer, but the smaller ones are only captured with the previous layer, the National Wetland Inventory. And so these are mapped, both the wetlands themselves and a 100-foot buffer, which is the common distance that developments need to stay away from these wetlands. So the last layer that's going to build in here slowly is our flood zones, and these are the FEMA designated flood zones. And I will note, this is actually starting to change, so we may need to update our mapper soon here, as some of you may know, but current FEMA flood maps do not incorporate climate change. So we have our 100-year and our 500-year flood plains mapped here. But we're going to see more and more flooding. We're going to see 100-year floods more frequently than 100 years, as the summer, I think, has demonstrated pretty well. We're going to see 500-year flood events. Those twice in a millennium storms are going to be happening more and more. Now, I basically told everybody to keep solar out of wetlands, and I think as a blanket statement, that's probably a fairly safe one. Flood zones are a little bit trickier. They're one of our more nuanced layers here. And so we have some definitions here with quick help, and we have an info dive here. So if you click on this, it actually pulls up, this is a document from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, but this was sort of the best thing I found in my research for explaining the difference between a floodway and a flood fringe at a glance. And we have mapped both of these. And one of the reasons I like Wallkill is we have that here. There's a darkest pink here, and if I click on it, sometimes you have to flip through these pop-ups. So it's picked up the wetlands below it, but I'm going to click this over arrow, and there I've gotten to my floodplain. So this is in a 1% or 100-year floodplain, but it is not in the floodway. If I click here in this darkest pink, this is in the 1% or the 100-year floodplain, but it is in a floodway. So what does that mean? The floodways are basically the areas closest to your main stream or river channel. They're the places that are going to flood most often, and they're going to flood with the fastest, highest waters. And so these are places you really don't want to put buildings at all. And in fact, you can't, they are regulated. And so going into our info dive here, here's our sort of stylized stream with some houses and solar. And here's the stream as normal. Here's our normal stream channel. During a flood, the floodway, the area closest to the stream, again, has really high velocity water and the deepest floodwaters as well. Buildings here are likely to get washed away. And if you floodproof them, they tend to make flooding downstream worse, or upstream even, because they keep water from spreading out naturally into wetlands. And so they can exacerbate flooding. They keep velocities high instead of dissipating that energy and letting the water soak into the ground and into wetlands. So you can't build in a floodway. Now our flood fringe, this is the outer edges on both sides of our creek of the whole floodplain. The floodplain incorporates the fringe and the floodway. The flood fringe is also not really a great place for buildings. If you're going to build a building there, you're going to have to flood proof it. You're going to probably expect more and more frequent flooding thanks to climate change. You cannot put something in the flood fringe that affects downstream or upstream flooding. So not really a great place for buildings. However, if engineered right, you can put solar in a flood fringe. You would have to raise the panels enough and have a hydrological engineer that can tell the developer how high they need to raise them to make sure that they have freeboard above the maximum flood height. They need to insulate all the electrical wires from damage from flooding. And you also want to underplant those panels. And I'm going to skip ahead here. If you imagine these panels underplanted with, say, cattails or another wetland suitable plant, you basically can have some wetland coverage, functionally speaking, and have solar over the top of that. And again, you're getting this dual land use. And so hopefully by raising the panels high enough and by having plants underneath it, native plants that are tolerant to flooding, those plants are going to reduce water velocities. They're going to help water seep into the ground and recharge our water tables. They're going to help filter pollutants out of these floods. And we can still have solar on top of that if it's done right. If it's done right. So again, this is sort of a devil in the details situation. But we think this could be a good scenario in some places. And so here in the info dive, we have some examples of what might be a good place and a bad place. So this is a forested floodplain. This is a fairly rare habitat type in the Hudson Valley, and they're really rich ecologically. These are great for biodiversity. They're great habitat. They're beautiful. And we wouldn't want to put solar in a place like this. There aren't a lot of them around. But now if you think about a more developed area where the floodplain has already been heavily impacted, the land's already been cleared, the wetlands are gone, and you have, bare dirt or grass like this that is going to be susceptible to erosion, that's not going to do a lot to slow down floods. This might be a place where you might want to think about putting some solar in and underplanting it with plants that are going to provide all those benefits that I talked about. So as we zoom in here, I found a couple examples here. Here we have, again, our wetlands, our floodway, where we cannot build at all. Sorry, there's our floodway, yes. But then we have this flood fringe, and this is clearly in a fairly developed area with lots of buildings around it, roads. So you could, look at what's going on here. What's the land cover here? Are there native plants here? Could there be native plants here? Is this an abandoned parking lot, an empty lot? Maybe it's vacant now because it keeps getting flooded. So there may be opportunities as you look at your town for, again, finding that win-win scenario in some of these floodplain fringes. Okay, I'm seeing we are at 8:47 on time, so I think maybe that's a good place to stop. Any questions on floodplains or wetlands first, and then maybe we can sort of zoom out and ask for more general questions? Floodplains, wetlands, questions?
Okay. You've already mentioned that the current maps don't take into account climate change. So what counts as a floodplain, flood fringe may be too small. Should we be looking to actually expand these areas beyond, say, what the current law allows?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's really a question that's bigger than the solar mapping tool. That's, I work on flood resiliency issues as well, and we could have a whole 5-week session on dealing with the issue that FEMA floodplains are no longer adequately describing where floods happen. And I believe that FEMA is actually starting to finally update how they're defining floodplains to account for climate change. I don't want to say too much more because I don't want to get the details wrong, but I think the short answer to your question is yes. Solar and for all other things, you should certainly be considering climate change and trying to get a better sense of where flooding is going to happen more and more often thanks to climate change in our communities. And thinking about whether it's solar development or another type of development, there are small scale models that could be done on the site level by a hydrological engineer that could be indicative of that. But thinking about your town as a whole, you're going to have to, hopefully there'll be updated FEMA maps available soon. Otherwise, just sort of looking at where those floodplains are, looking at the local topography, the local land cover, right? Because the more pavement and rooftop you have, the worse flooding tends to be versus natural wetlands. So it's sort of, I'll just leave it at that for the sake of time, but it's a great question and a very, very current issue to be dealt with. Okay, hearing no other questions, I think I'm gonna turn it back over to Manna for some closing thoughts, if I may.
Well, I would say in terms of homework, I would strongly recommend that people go back through what Alex so richly provided and do it step by step, slide by slide. It was a lot of information to absorb. And I think in that process, we'll probably discover other questions that we can address the next time we get together. If there's anyone on the call that has not yet registered, please do so that we have a list. Melissa, did you notice if there was?
Nope, I think everyone was able to check in.
Okay, great.
Katie
So,
Albert, I put you under Austining and I added your email on there too.
Great. So that seems to me the best next step is to make the time to go back over this and see what questions arise. I want to thank Alan Newman for a couple of really spot on questions. Then if anyone has any questions in between, as I said, refer them to me or Melissa, and if we can't answer them, we'll reach out to Audrey and Alex. But I am continuously amazed at what a wonderful, helpful tool this is and how much work went into making it accessible. And hopefully that will lead to good recommendations for the towns. Anybody else have? It would be nice to get out, and be able to do other things. And also, I will be sure that between Melissa and I, we will get a link so that those people who unavoidably had to miss tonight, which was so rich. And then in the next couple of sessions, we're actually going to be doing some practicing and getting familiar with the tool firsthand. Any other last minute comments from any of the participants?
I would add, we just went through, what would you say that was half of part 3? You're like 75% of it. So that we're going to go over the rest next time, but definitely try it out on your own until kind of what we got up to, or feel free to go past part and finish part 3 on your own for next time. It's a lot of info in part 3.
Yep, I'd say we did it maybe 50% or so, and absolutely, it's
more layers.
Likes looking at maps. I encourage you to check out your town, and you'll learn all sorts of things that you may not have realized about different resources and features of your local communities.
The only thing I would say, Manna, is just a reminder is that I think it's 3 weeks until the next meeting, correct? Because we shifted from the 11th to the 18th. So you have 3 weeks, an extra week to take a look through if you have time to do it. Thanks again, everybody.
And I want to strongly, I will send around the link to scaling up solar and where in that video you can find the lawyers' comments, and especially if you know someone who's in negotiations in your town with a developer. I know I've gotten a lot of questions and I just don't know the answer, and he's very good about just answering simple questions, and then if anybody wants to retain him if it's a very big project. And actually there was a project developed where there was quite a bit of NIMBY, not in my backyard, objection nearby, and because we had done a very objective presentation on exercising caution when scaling up solar, I was able to with justification or credibility, provide comments that allowed that project to go through, because it really was, all the things that we're learning had been incorporated into the thinking that went behind that project. So we'll send that around. People can share articles by putting them into the folder. And also I do want to ask, does anybody mind if we share your contact information, not beyond this project, but amongst the participants in the project? We haven't done that yet, but somebody might want to follow up. So does anybody have any objection? Let me put it that way. Okay, good. All right, well, I wish you all a good 2 weeks. Stay healthy, enjoy Halloween. And my closing comment is turn your ballot over and vote for the Green Amendment. Don't forget to do that to make clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment a right for all New Yorkers. So on that note, thank you, everybody, providers and participants. This is great work. Thank you.